Welcome in, everybody. We're diving deep today into something I find super fascinating, and that's the connection between cannabis and spirituality.
It's a good one.
Yeah. We want to learn about all those historical and cultural uses of cannabis, especially its role in all these different spiritual practices around the world and throughout time.
Yeah.
We're going to be unpacking this awesome YouTube video called The Role of Weed in Spirituality. Mystical Experiences of Marijuana from the channel Awakening Wisdom.
Oh, nice.
So I am so ready to get into this.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I think, cannabis, it's a plant that sparks so much debate all the time, right? But it's also a plant that can inspire these incredibly profound, spiritual experiences.
Exactly. And that's what I think is so interesting about it. Is it just like a recreational drug, or can it actually be this tool for real spiritual exploration?
Right.
I got so many questions.
Well, I think a good place to start is always with, the history, Cannabis has, this super long history intertwined with spirituality. We're talking thousands of years.
Wow.
It's been part of rituals and traditions, sacred texts all over the world for a really, really long time.
So it's not just like a modern thing.
No, not at all.
Okay. Now, the video mentioned ancient India. What was going on over there?
So in ancient India, cannabis, it's actually mentioned in the Vedas, which are the sacred Hindu scriptures.
Wow.
And they even link cannabis to Shiva, who's a major deity.
Oh.
And they have this special preparation called bang, which is like a drink made with cannabis. And they consume it during festivals.
What's that symbolizing?
It symbolizes the shedding of the ego, connecting to something larger than yourself.
So it's not just about getting high.
No.
It's actually using this plant to reach a spiritual experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you see this idea of using cannabis to connect with, the spiritual realm in other cultures too.
Really?
Yeah, like the Siberian shamans. They use cannabis in a lot of their ceremonies, especially during funerals, because the smoke, it was seen as a bridge between the physical world and the spirit world.
Oh, wow. That's super interesting. Like a spiritual telephone line or something?
Yeah, a great way to put it.
I like that.
And they didn't, just use any cannabis. They used specific types in their rituals. They'd often incorporate drumming and chanting and dancing. And they would enter a trance-like state where they believed they could actually communicate with spirits.
Wow.
And through that communication, gain knowledge or even healing.
That's so interesting.
And these practices, they're still found today, not just in Siberia, but also in parts of the Americas and Asia.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's all these different cultures are using cannabis to get to these different states of consciousness.
Totally.
And the video also mentioned the Rastafarian tradition too.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, where they see cannabis as a sacred herb for communing with God, or Jah, as they call him.
Right.
I think that's where it gets really interesting. The video calls cannabis a veil lifter. It helps us access hidden dimensions of reality. Is there any actual science behind that idea?
Okay, so hidden dimensions, that's definitely open to interpretation. But we know cannabis, it has a big effect on the endocannabinoid system in our brains.
Right, yeah.
And this system, it plays a role in regulating so many things. Our mood, our perceptions, our sense of time.
So wait, explain that a little more. What exactly is the endocannabinoid system?
Okay, so think of it like a huge communication network inside your body.
Okay.
And it uses special molecules to send messages throughout the nervous system. It's like your brain's way of keeping everything balanced, your mood, your sleep, your appetite, even pain.
Gotcha. So cannabis is interacting with that whole system.
Exactly, yeah.
And by interacting with it, it can shift our awareness and change how we're experiencing things.
Yeah, and some of those experiences can feel really profound.
Okay, but are we talking genuine spiritual experiences here, not just feeling relaxed or giggly, you know what I mean?
Right. So while cannabis can create this environment for mystical experiences to happen, it's not a guarantee,
Yeah.
It's not a guarantee you'll reach enlightenment. I like to think of it this way. Cannabis might loosen the hinges on this door of perception.
I bet.
But it's up to you, to decide if you're going to open that door and what you do once you've walked through it.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So you're saying your intention going into it really matters.
Intention is huge.
Okay.
If you're approaching cannabis with this genuine desire for spiritual growth, and you're also being mindful and self-aware, that's so essential.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
So what kinds of experiences are people actually reporting when they use cannabis with, that kind of intention?
Oh, all kinds of interesting things.
Like, well,
They talk about like seeing colors more vividly, their senses feeling heightened, even feeling this like sense of unity and interconnectedness with like the whole universe.
wow.
Yeah, some people they describe feeling like this deep peace and tranquility, and others talk about feeling this profound connection to nature.
That's pretty amazing. It kind of sounds like a psychedelic experience almost.
Yeah, there are some similarities for sure,
Hmm.
but I think it's really important to remember that every experience is going to be unique and not every experience is going to be positive.
So it's not all sunshine and rainbows then?
No, not always. It's important to be realistic about that, I think.
Right.
It's a powerful tool,
Right.
but you have to use it responsibly and like understand the effects it can have.
Right. And I think we'll talk more about the potential risks later, right?
Definitely, yeah.
One thing that really stood out to me in the video was this idea of using cannabis as like an aid for meditation.
Oh, yeah,
What are
interesting.
your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a really fascinating area. And it actually goes back to like what we were talking about with the endocannabinoid system.
Right.
Remember how it helps regulate mood and focus?
Yes.
Well, some people, they actually find that cannabis can help quiet their mind and enhance their focus, so it makes it easier for them to get into a meditative state.
So it's like cannabis is helping turn down the volume on all that like mental chatter.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it.
Yeah.
The video also mentions something else that you might find pretty interesting.
What's that?
This idea of cannabis stimulating the upper chakras.
Chakras. Okay, we're getting a little more esoteric here.
We are.
Can you explain like what chakras are?
Okay, so chakras, they come from Eastern spiritual traditions like
Mm.
Hinduism and Buddhism.
Mm.
And they're thought to be energy centers within the subtle body, which is like this energetic blueprint that exists alongside our physical body.
Okay, so like not something we can actually like physically measure,
Right.
more of an energetic or spiritual thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And while there's no like scientific evidence that they exist, a lot of people they find them really helpful for understanding the flow of energy within the body.
Hmm.
And each chakra, it's associated with like specific qualities and functions.
Okay.
So, for example, the third eye chakra, which is in the center of your forehead,
Yeah.
it's associated with intuition, inner vision, spiritual insight, things like that.
And the idea is that cannabis can help like activate or open these chakras.
That's what some people believe. Yeah. They
Uh,
say they feel this like heightened sense of energy flow in those areas, particularly the upper chakras, like the third eye that we just talked about, and the crown chakra, which is at the top of your head.
mhm.
And the crown chakra, it's associated with like a sense of connection to the divine.
That's wild.
Oh.
But even if we can't like scientifically measure these chakras, it seems like a lot of people are saying that cannabis is having these like really profound effects on their energetic or spiritual experience.
That's true. And you have to remember, like, science is constantly evolving. And our understanding of things like consciousness and the subtle body, it's still pretty early.
Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe one day we'll have more concrete ways of measuring and understanding these energies.
Exciting to think about.
It is.
So it seems like there's all this potential for cannabis to be used for spiritual growth.
Yes.
But obviously, there are also some potential risks we need to keep in mind, too.
Of course, yeah. And we'll explore both of those sides in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay. I am ready for more. This is fascinating.
Me too.
Okay, so we've been talking about, like, the potential for cannabis to, help us explore spiritually and even, like, activate those energy centers, those chakras.
Right.
But, anything this powerful, there's got to be, like, another side to the coin. What about the potential downsides?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's super important to acknowledge that there are potential risks, especially if you're not like using cannabis with a lot of intention and awareness.
Yeah.
The video we're looking at, it really emphasizes that.
So what are some of the specific, risks or challenges that people might face if they're not being mindful about it?
Well, one that comes up a lot is using cannabis as a form of escapism.
Oh, yeah, I can totally see that.
Right. It'd be so easy to just get caught up in those pleasant sensations and avoid dealing with like real life problems.
Totally, yeah. It's like cannabis might offer temporary relief from stress or, difficult emotions, but it's not a solution for actually working on those things.
Exactly.
So it's not about numbing ourselves out.
Yeah.
It's more about like using it to maybe face those challenges with more like clarity or even resilience.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Hmm.
And that actually ties into another risk that's mentioned in the video, this idea of bypassing genuine self-work.
Bypassing self-work, what does that mean exactly?
So sometimes people might use cannabis with this expectation that it's like magically going to lead them to enlightenment or, these profound
Oh, I
insights.
get it. It's like trying to take a shortcut
Yeah,
instead of
exactly.
actually doing the work
Right.
of introspection and growth.
Yeah. And while cannabis can definitely like enhance introspection and even make it easier to have mystical experiences, you can't forget that real spiritual growth, it takes consistent effort and discipline.
Right.
It takes a willingness to like face those less pleasant parts of
Our
ourselves.
shadows, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like all that stuff we don't want to look at.
Right, all those fears and insecurities and negative patterns, it's
Yeah.
easy to avoid that stuff.
So it's not about using cannabis to like create this perfect little happy bubble.
No, no, not
It's more about like using it to like see those darker corners and actually work through them.
That's such a good point. And, that kind of inner work, it can be really uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but it's so necessary for real transformation.
Now the video, it also mentions something called spiritual mirages.
Oh, yeah, interesting term.
What are those?
So it's basically this idea that, like, sometimes when people are under the influence of cannabis, they might have experiences that they think are these profound spiritual revelations. But really, they're just illusions
Right.
or like projections of their own minds.
So it's like mistaking a hallucination for like a genuine spiritual insight.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why having discernment is so important. You have to be able to tell the difference between a real, authentic spiritual experience, which usually comes with a sense of peace and clarity and connection, and something that's just, the result of being high.
I imagine that can be really tricky, especially for someone who's like new to exploring cannabis in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you think people can develop that kind of like discernment?
Well, one of the most important things is like actually integrating the insights you get from those cannabis experiences into your everyday life.
Hmm. What do you mean by that?
It's not enough to just like have a profound experience while you're high. You have to translate those insights into like positive changes in your thoughts and behaviors, your relationships.
So you can't just leave it on the meditation cushion.
Right.
You have to actually put it into practice in the real world.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that's where mindful reflection is really important.
Hmm.
Taking time to like journal about your experiences, meditate on what you've learned, and think about how you can, apply those lessons to your daily life.
So it's a continuous process of learning and integration.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm. Okay, now remember how we were talking about like the subtle body and those energy centers, the
Yeah.
chakras?
Yeah.
So the video, it also talks about how important it is to stay grounded, especially when you're, exploring these more like ethereal realms.
Oh, yeah, that's key.
What do you mean by grounded?
So it means staying connected to your physical body and like to the earth.
Hmm.
Even while you're exploring these, higher states of consciousness, it's like having a strong foundation so you can reach higher without, losing your balance.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Because if you get too caught up in all the like heady spiritual stuff, you can lose touch with your everyday life and responsibilities.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where practices like meditation and yoga or even just spending time in nature, those can be so helpful.
Mm.
They can help you stay grounded while still being open to those expanded states of awareness.
So it's all about balance.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to sum it up.
Hmm.
It's about approaching cannabis with like this holistic perspective,
Hmm.
considering not just the mental and spiritual effects, but also the physical and emotional aspects of your being.
So it's not just about like getting high.
No?
It's about cultivating well-being on like all levels.
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes so much sense. Now, we've been talking a lot about, the subjective experience of all of this.
Right.
But I'm kind of curious about like, what does science actually have to say about cannabis and spirituality?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Let's shift gears a little bit and look at it from a scientific perspective.
Okay.
So, while we've been, exploring all the spiritual and experiential aspects, there's this whole other layer of understanding that comes from research.
Okay, so what does science say about this plant that has like been captivating us for so long?
Well, like we mentioned earlier, cannabis contains these compounds called cannabinoids, like
What?
THC and CBD.
And those are the things that interact with our endocannabinoid system, which, affects our mood, sleep, appetite, all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And research is showing us more and more about how cannabis actually affects that system.
Okay, so what are some of the key findings that you find really interesting?
So one area that I think is really relevant to what we're talking about is how cannabis affects the default mode network in the brain.
The default mode network. What's that?
Okay, so imagine your brain is like a computer.
Okay.
The default mode network is like the screensaver. It's a network of brain regions that's active when you're not focused on anything specific. So like when your mind is wandering or daydreaming.
Oh, okay, I can picture that. So how does cannabis affect that?
Well, studies have shown that cannabis can actually like temporarily disrupt the activity of that network.
So what does that mean, practically?
It means that when someone's under the influence of cannabis, they might experience a decrease in like self-referential thinking, that voice in your head that's always chattering,
Right.
and an increase in present moment awareness.
Hmm.
It's like your brain is taking a break from its usual patterns.
So it's like quieting the ego and letting us be more present.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Wow.
And this could explain why some people report feeling that sense of unity and interconnectedness, maybe even transcendence, when they use cannabis.
It's so interesting to think about how a plant can have such a huge impact on our brain activity and change how we experience the world.
It really is.
Another area of research that I think is really fascinating is how cannabis affects empathy and compassion.
Yes, and there's some really interesting research on that.
Like what?
Well, studies have shown that, when people are under the influence of cannabis, they tend to be more sensitive to the emotions of other people. And they're more likely to do things that are helpful and kind.
So it's boosting our ability to connect with others and actually care?
Yeah, it seems that way.
Wow. That could have huge implications for how we treat each other and how we interact with the world around us.
I think so, especially in a world that often feels so divided.
Right.
Cannabis, it could be a tool for creating more understanding, more compassion, more unity.
I love that.
Yeah.
But obviously, we have to use it wisely and responsibly.
Of course, yeah.
And that brings us right back to mindful cannabis use.
It always does.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about the plant itself.
No.
It's about how we choose to use it and what we're hoping to gain from that experience.
Exactly, and that's a journey that everyone has to take for themselves.
Well, speaking of journeys, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
What do you say we take a quick break and then come back and talk about some practical tips for, actually using cannabis mindfully and integrating all this into everyday life?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm ready to, really get into the practical side of all this.
Yeah, me too.
We've talked about the history and all these different cultural and spiritual uses of cannabis. We even touched on some of the science.
Right.
But now I want to know, how can we actually use cannabis in a way that, really helps us grow spiritually and supports our well-being?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
It is.
It's one thing to talk about all this, but actually putting it into practice, that's where it gets real.
Right, exactly.
Where?
So, where do we even start?
Well, we talked about it a little before, but it's so important. I think we need to mention it again. Setting intentions. If we're using cannabis for spiritual reasons, we have to be really clear about why we're doing it. What are we actually hoping to get out of this?
Yeah, it's before you go on a trip, you got to know where you're going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just taking a few minutes to really think about your intentions before you even start can make a huge difference.
So, how would you recommend somebody go about setting those intentions? Is there a process?
It can be as simple or as fancy as you want it to be.
Okay.
Some people, they like to make it into a whole ritual, like light a candle, maybe say a prayer. But even just taking a few deep breaths, closing your eyes, and just asking yourself, why am I using cannabis right now? That can be so powerful.
And what kind of intentions would people typically set? Are there any examples?
It really depends on, the person and what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Some people might want to connect with, their inner wisdom or their intuition. Others might want to cultivate more compassion and empathy. And some people, they might just want to feel more peaceful and relaxed.
Right.
It's all about making it your own,
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, we've set our intentions.
Okay.
What's next?
Well, I think it's really important to create a space that actually supports those intentions.
Okay.
Our surroundings, they can have a huge impact on our state of mind.
Right, if you're trying to have this really peaceful, introspective experience, you don't want to be in a place that's like loud and chaotic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're using cannabis for spiritual exploration, it's a good idea to find somewhere quiet and comfortable, where you won't be distracted.
Like maybe dim the lights, light some candles, put on some relaxing music.
Exactly, yeah. Whatever helps you create that sense of, like, sacredness,
Right.
reverence.
What about like dosage? I know we talked about starting low and going slow before.
Right.
Are there any other guidelines people should keep in mind?
Yeah, I think it's good to think about, like, the time of day, too. Think about how cannabis might affect your sleep or your energy levels,
Yeah.
You don't want to be feeling super groggy or out of it if you have stuff to do.
That's a good point. And I imagine like different strains of cannabis can have different effects too, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's worth experimenting a little bit and seeing what works best for you.
Right.
Some strains are more uplifting, some are more relaxing.
So you get to do your research.
You do be an informed consumer.
Right.
And then once you've, consumed the cannabis, just pay attention to how you're feeling, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
And if you start feeling anxious or uncomfortable, it's totally okay to stop,
Right. You got to listen to your body.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to know your limits.
It's all about self-care.
It is, yeah. And it's a good idea to have some, like, grounding practices handy just in case.
Grounding practices. What do you mean by that?
So these are things that can help bring you back to the present moment if you're feeling, like, overwhelmed or disconnected. Things like, deep breathing, focusing on your senses, or connecting with nature. Those can be really helpful.
So it's like a safety net.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Now, the video also mentions some specific practices that people can do, while they're using cannabis to, like, enhance their spiritual exploration.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Can you tell me more about those?
Yeah, so one that's really powerful is meditation.
Okay.
Cannabis can help quiet the mind, like we were talking about before, and it can make it easier to access those deeper states of awareness.
And it doesn't have to be, like, formal meditation. Right.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It could be walking meditation, mindful movement, or even just lying down and paying attention to your breath. Whatever works for you.
What about journaling?
Oh, journaling is great.
Yeah.
Cannabis can really boost creativity and introspection, so it can be a really good time to journal about your thoughts and feelings and any insights you might have.
Yeah, it's like capturing those moments of, like, inspiration before they're gone.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And another practice that I find really powerful is connecting with nature.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Like, cannabis can heighten your senses and make you more aware of, like, the beauty around you.
Totally, yeah. So whether it's, going for a walk in the woods or sitting by a lake or even just looking up at the stars, spending time in nature can be so grounding and rejuvenating.
It's like connecting to the Earth's energy.
Yeah, beautifully said. It really speaks to that interconnectedness.
So I think, as we wrap up this deep dive, what really strikes me is just how complex this topic is.
It really is.
Cannabis has such a long and multifaceted history.
Yeah.
And its role in spirituality, it's ancient, but it's also still evolving.
That's true.
And there's no, like, one right way to use it.
Definitely not.
It's really about approaching it with curiosity and, like, a willingness to experiment.
Right.
And obviously with respect for the plant and its effects.
Yeah, and always with an awareness of your own intentions and why you're doing it.
Well said. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of cannabis and spirituality.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, remember, the most important journey is the one within.
That's the truth.
So keep exploring.